Well, good morning, everybody. Happy,
Merry day after Christmas morning.
that's what I was going to say. Happy day after Christmas morning. She said, Merry day after Christmas morning. Same thing. We're glad you're here. We are broadcasting live from the auditorium of our church, the Sanctuary, in Jupiter, Florida, on this gorgeous South Florida morning. We were noticing that there was not a cloud in the sky on our drive over here from home. It's 78 degrees. There's not a cloud in the sky. And the biggest decision that Stacie and I have to make today is what we're going to do after this is over. We're either going to take a nap or go to the beach. It's very tough. We're going to pray about it. Hopefully we'll come up.
I'm going to take a nap on the beach.
There you go. We may take a nap on the beach. Anyway, so for those of you who are tuning in live from places around the world where it is cold and snowy and all of that stuff, you're always more than welcome to come visit us in South Florida this time of year. It's absolutely gorgeous. I do miss cold weather and I do miss snow this time of year.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm very glad that I don't live in it. So anyway, we are not, obviously, because we're doing this, we're not having an in-person worship service this morning. We decided that we would do it this way instead, given everybody's busy schedules and to give our volunteers a bit of a break. And so it's just Stacie and me and our director of media and production, Daniel, who got here earlier than we did to set everything up and get everything ready. So we're glad that you're joining us. If you're joining us, let us know where you're watching from. We love to see that stuff. We love to see where people are watching from. Let us know who you are. Whenever we do this sort of thing, people tune in from all over the world, and it's always very cool for us to see where they're tuning in from. So let us know. There's also a Connect form. We haven't done this in a while, so what's it called? A stay in touch form. There's a stay in touch form. There is a link. If you're watching on Facebook, there's a link at the top of this. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a link on the bottom of the screen. But if you click that link and you want to stay in, it'll take you to a form where you can stay in touch with us. You can fill out some information. It'll take you about 30 seconds. And that way you can stay up to date on what's going on here in Jupiter, Florida, and what's going on at the Sanctuary in particular. So, anything else that needs to be said by way of introduction? I'll say this in a minute, but
Okay.
Anything besides this, I'm going to talk about my new coffee cup in a second. But
We had a really sweet Christmas Eve service here
we did.
with our church family.
We did.
If you
Yep.
tuned in online, maybe you were here with us. It was a sweet time.
It was.
And it was a full house.
Full house.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about it a lot leading up to Christmas, that even more so than Easter and Mother's Day, which are the two other holidays over the course of a year where people are most likely to go to church, Christmas time, Christmas Eve, Christmas time services are the ones that people are most likely to go to. If they're invited, they're most likely to go to, even if they don't go to church the rest of the year. And we kind of saw a reflection of that. This isn't a big room. If we had a camera, we could sort of pan around and show you. This is not a big room. I think we have...
If I reach out, I can almost touch the wall.
That's not true. That part is not true. But there are 200 seats in here in this room.
198.
198 seats in here. And so it's not a big room, but it's big enough to where we can fit almost 200 people. But it's not so big to where it feels overwhelming. It's still intimate, and we love that. It's designed specifically for that. But it was full. It was full in here on Christmas Eve, and it was great to see all the people that we got to see. So it's a different kind of service. Every Christmas Eve we do a lessons and carols service, which is pretty simple, easy format. Churches have been doing this for many, many, many years, but it's basically a service where different readers read through certain parts of the Bible, certain scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament, that retell the story of redemption, the mess that we found ourselves in as a human race, and the lengths that God went to save us from our mess. And then interspersed between those readings are songs, carols, songs that correspond to the reading. So it's a festive service. And I loved it. It was
loved
great.
it too.
And then in terms of what we did personally for Christmas Eve and Christmas, what did we do? You tell the good
we
people,
went
honey.
home, and Tullian loves to have fondue on Christmas Eve. I don't know if anyone else has fondue on Christmas Eve, but we do.
If you're a Christian, you do.
Yes. And so we had fondue and lasagna.
Let me speak to the fondue thing for a second.
Speak to the fondue.
So my dad was born and raised in Switzerland. He died in 2010. He's no longer with us. I've talked about him on numerous occasions. He was, in my very humble, biased opinion, the greatest man who ever lived. Anyway, he was born and raised in Switzerland, and it was very traditional in Switzerland growing up that you would have cheese fondue on Christmas Eve. And so I was born into this tradition, and from as far back as I can remember, that's what we did as a family on Christmas Eve. And then I enjoyed it so much that I imposed that everywhere I went and carried that tradition on. So there is an entire country of people who like fondue on Christmas Eve. But anyway, so that's why we do that, and I love it. It's just bread and cheese. Who doesn't like bread and cheese? Bread and hot melted cheese. So that was good.
Right. It's the if you in Texas, we normally like tamales and like chips and queso. So it's almost like the same thing.
Right.
But just
A Swiss version. Right.
It's, right.
Still breadish and cheese.
Yeah, it's like a carb
Right.
and a cheese product.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's
same.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what else?
We had Jenna and Nate with us.
Right. Who's Jenna and Nate?
Two of our 5 children. Jenna is the only girl, and she's 20, and she lives with us. And Nate came up to visit for the evening, and he came to the service. So 2 of our 5 children were here in the service. Jenna read. So if you watch the online service, Jenna was one of the readers. And so we had them at home with us. And
Nate lives in Fort Lauderdale, which is about, I don't know, hour south of here. So we came up. He's 24. So we
watched The Christmas Story.
A Christmas Story.
A Christmas Story.
Yeah, a portion of it. Yeah.
And then we opened gifts and stockings with them on Christmas morning.
Yeah, which was fun. It was a mess. There were only 4 of us there, and it was a complete mess. I mean,
it was a fun mess.
it was a real fun mess. We, Christmas morning is very different now that our children are older. When they were younger, of course, as many of you know, and we are older. But they don't get up at the crack of dawn. Thank God. I inadvertently got up at the crack of dawn on Christmas morning, which was not planned. I just woke up and I couldn't fall back asleep, so I ended up just getting out of bed. But so we started at about 10 o'clock maybe. They kind of rolled out of their rooms about 10 o'clock, and
I can't remember.
and we started with Jenna reading from the Jesus Storybook Bible, which I've talked about on numerous occasions. Jenna read.
Almost the same thing.
Right. Jenna read from the Jesus Storybook Bible, the Christmas story, which was great. And then we opened stockings first. And then we opened presents second. And it was pretty systematic and methodical how we opened. Everyone opened their stocking first. So it wasn't like everybody ripping everything open and we missing everything. We all got to participate in everybody's present opening. We had breakfast. That was about it for the morning. They left around maybe 11:30 or 12 or something
Like that.
to go down and spend Christmas with their mother. And then we had about a 2-hour reprieve, a little bit of a break.
Oh, I cooked.
Yeah, I had a break. I took a nap. She cooked. She didn't. I meant a break from people. Yeah.
Yes, there was a break from people.
And then my youngest brother, Anthony, who's 38, and his girlfriend, Emily, drove up from Fort Lauderdale. And then my oldest son, Gabe, who was on his way to Tennessee, dropped off our 2 grandsons, the grandboys, Mason and Bryson, at about, 3:30. So from 3:30 till about 8 o'clock, we had Anthony, Emily, Bryson, and Mason, and that was fun. Having the boys there was a blast. It was like reliving Christmas when our children were small with having them there.
And if anyone gave their grandchildren or children a Mr. Beats toy for Christmas, God bless you.
We won't go into details, but
He's
if you know, you know.
You know.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, our oldest Mason was given a Mr. Beats, which I'm not even going to tell you what it is because I'm not sure I can fully explain what it is.
Uncle Nate gave it to
Uncle
him.
Nate, our 24-year-old son, gave it to his nephew, Mason, and
It's one of those
it's
toys you wanna
loud
take the
and it
batteries
makes,
out.
and he doesn't want to ever shut it off, and so I had to confiscate it and hold Mr. Beats in my lap with my arms wrapped around it so that he couldn't grab it. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty funny. And let me also point out, this is a very special coffee cup I have
Yes.
here this morning. My friend Javier Ramos. Javier, am I pronouncing that correctly? How did you tell me to pronounce it? Ramos.
Ramos.
Yeah, right. Ramos,
Javier
Ramos, whatever. I don't feel bad mispronouncing your last name because nobody pronounces my last name correctly, okay?
Or your first name.
Right.
Two
So Javier is from Dallas, and he and I are huge Dallas Cowboy fans. And so he bought me for Christmas a Dallas Cowboy mug. I have about 9 of them. I don't have this one. And he had it personalized with my name
That's
on
the
it.
only one you have your name on.
It's the only
For
one I have
sure.
my name on.
Out of all
yeah.
your Dallas mugs.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Javi, and shout out to Javier Ramos for
Very
my Dallas
good.
Cowboy mug, which I'm drinking from very proudly today.
Javi is in Texas right now, and he sadly could only pick one return flight this evening, and it's right before the Cowboys game starts.
Tonight, yeah.
Tonight,
So he's
so-
going to be on an airplane while I'm sitting on my couch watching it. But anyway, what else? Anything else by way of introduction or fun conversation?
I mean, I can't think of anything.
The only
It's been
thing-
a busy week.
It's been a very busy week, and as much as we love being with you fine folks today, when this is over, to be completely honest, I'm going to probably feel like we can exhale for the first time in a little while. Yeah. We typically do this. We fly up to North Carolina around Christmas time or right after Christmas to see my mom and some of my family who lives up near Asheville, North Carolina. And we decided that this year we weren't going to do that, not because we don't love my mother and my other family members who live there. I think we're going to try to go later this month or later next month, but we just needed a break. And so we decided to stay home. We are going to sort of shut everything down and shut everything off, and we are just going to do nothing but sleep, eat. There are a bunch of movies that are in the theater now that I want to go see, that we will go see. We have a variety of different restaurants that we're going to visit. We've been given a bunch of gift cards from people
Praise God.
for different places, so we're going to utilize those. And I'm very much looking forward to having a week where we do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Jenna, who Stacie mentioned, lives with us. She's going to be in Fort Lauderdale for a few days, and then to the Bahamas with a friend for a few days. So we have our tiny little place all to ourselves, which means we're just going to literally do nothing. My plan for this week is to do nothing. Stacie and I had a little talk about that earlier this week, and I said, let's talk about expectations for what this coming week is going to look like. And thankfully, our expectations aligned perfectly, which is do nothing. And get sort of, refueled for what we anticipate to be a very fruitful and fun 2022, which we're very much looking forward to. We'll be back live in person next Sunday. And so we're looking forward to that. But before then, we have a week where we have nothing to do. Yeah, nothing to do, which we don't find it difficult to turn the switch off. I just don't. But anyway,
Yeah.
What else? Anything?
I mean, I can't think of anything.
One of the things that we talked about on Christmas Eve, I want to touch on a few of those things, talk about a couple of those things. I mentioned a few minutes ago that on Christmas Eve, we do a Lessons in Carol service, and I always do the final reading. It comes from John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14, which is that passage which says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And it really talks about the incarnation of Jesus. And then the final reading, I do like a maybe 10, 15-minute short message based on those verses. And one of the things that I pointed out on, Friday night, is that while most of us anyway, love Christmas, we love things about Christmas, we don't usually take time to stop, pause, and ask why the very first Christmas was necessary. And so we talked a little bit about that Friday night. The fact that God would come himself speaks to the severity of our situation, to the severity of the problem of the human condition. That, God coming himself, God coming in the flesh is not a divine overreaction. It was an absolute necessity in order to rescue us from the mess that we made. And so we talked about that. And one of the things that always strikes me about that passage, and one of the reasons I love it so much, is because a right understanding of Christmas in particular, and the way that passage describes the incarnation of Jesus, God taking on human flesh and frailties and coming into this world to save us, to rescue us, is that it completely reverses the way we typically hear about God and what we typically think about Christianity. And I mentioned this on Friday night, that when we typically think about God being good, perfect, holy, we think that we have to be good, perfect, and holy in order to have any kind of connection with him, that the better we become and the more obedient we are and the more self-improvement we can muster up, that the deeper our connection with God becomes. And yet what Christmas tells us, and what this passage tells us in particular, is that God comes to us not because we are clean, but God comes to us because we are dirty. That our sin does not deter God from coming near, that our sin is what summons God's nearness. And that is a very, very different picture of God than what we typically think, or what a lot of people typically think. They think that God is for the good person, the clean person, the competent person, the person who is very serious about dotting their moral I's and crossing their moral T's. And yet what we find in that passage in particular is God coming to us because we were bad, not because we were good. Christmas is not a reward for good people. It's a necessity for bad people. And so you've heard me say perhaps 1,000 times that God loves and uses weak and bad people who fail because there aren't any other kinds of people. And John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14 really speaks to that. In fact, when you get down to verse 11, it says that he came into his own. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. In other words, God didn't come rescue us because we were begging for rescue. He came to rescue us because we were rebelling. He came because we were bad. He came because we were rebellious. He came because we were weak, because we were dirty. It is our weakness and our need and our sin that summons God to rescue us, and that summons God to save us. So we were talking about that Friday night, and we were talking about that a little bit more this morning, and you pointed out very appropriately that who the angels announced the birth of Jesus to also speaks to that.
Mm-hmm. And it's God sending his message of a rescuer through his angels to people on both ends of the spectrum of what we would think are, society's lowest and highest. And specifically, he went to the lowest first, which are the shepherds. Mm-hmm. And typically, we were talking about how if we've been in church and we've watched Christmas plays or seen a nativity scene, shepherds, kind of look like a blue-collar worker who maybe the elders in church were the shepherds in the play, or little kids were dressed up. But shepherds were like the truck drivers of biblical times. That profession was very low on the totem pole. And it's
No offense to any truckers out there.
Absolutely not. But it's like they weren't looked at as the pillars of the community and, working in the soup kitchen and leading a Bible study, men's Bible study, or in church and on the prayer team. These guys worked out in the field. They worked during the night. They, it's like the angels came to a truck stop on the middle, of America on I-10, and they're drinking bad coffee and having some conversation, and angels appear to them. And so the fact that God would send this most important message to and through people who don't have an education in theology or some sort of pedigree of theological importance to then send to the rest of the world amazes me. And it should say something to us.
The whole Christmas story, when you think about the way God came, okay? I mean, just the very fact that God came is obviously point number one. The fact that he needed to come is point number one, which I made just a minute ago. But how God came, the fact that he could have come any way he wanted. I mean, there was a massive universal problem that God was coming to solve, and he could have solved it any way that he wanted to solve it. He's God. There was nothing that was obligating him to solve it in the particular way that he solved it. He could have solved it in any way that he wanted to. And the fact that he chose to become human, and the form of humanity that he took was that of a child, a baby. He gave this child to a young girl and a young man who were not, as you mentioned a minute ago about the shepherds, these were not, Mary and Joseph were not the pillars of society. They were nothing in particular, nothing special. The fact that he would go to Mary, and Joseph and entrust them with this holy task, this all-important eternal task, responsibility.
And in a way that would look scandalous to people outside of their
That's
relationship.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean...
So it looks scandalous.
Right. Yeah, I mean, people would see...
Who's believing that?
Right. People would see Mary pregnant, and Joseph and her were not married yet. And of course, what's Mary's explanation for when her belly starts to grow? Well, God came to me. They're like, okay, yeah, whatever. God came to you, sure. I mean, who's going to believe that, as Stacie just mentioned? So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is wrapped in lowliness and scandal and humility, really. So the fact that God would come in the way that he came, that he would come to the people that he came to. The very fact, even the smallest detail that we overlook, because we've heard it our entire lives, that they have to travel to Bethlehem and there's no room for them to stay. There's no place for them to stay. And so they end up in a barn with animals. I mean, literally, it's just this is the God of the universe who spoke all things into existence, who says about himself that one day every tongue will confess and every knee will bow because he's the king of the cosmic order. That's this God who there's no room for him in any hotel. He's in the belly, in the womb of a teenage girl, wrapped in scandal. She gives birth in a barn around animals, and then God delivers this news through angels to shepherds, these people who Stacie mentioned are, in that day, the lowest on the totem pole, professionally speaking, is just the whole thing is so...
It's so unconventional.
I'm debating on whether or not to say this because I never like to say anything that sounds critical. But I'm gonna say this without being specific about where we saw it. But we were watching a Christmas Eve service on Christmas Eve. On TV.
Late Christmas Eve.
Late, right around midnight. And the preacher, the speaker, the minister was speaking about this. And I loved what he had to say, that everything about Christmas speaks of God's willingness to go low. to be lowly,
To be small.
to be small, smallness and lowliness and humility. And it was absolutely right. What he was saying was absolutely true in that moment. And yet the entire thing was taking place.
The service we were watching.
The service we were watching, the entire thing was taking place in a context of
extravagance,
extreme pomp and circumstance. I mean, extreme. And it was, the whole thing was incredibly, in one sense, very beautiful, aesthetically speaking. In another sense, it was incredibly religious.
There was nothing small about it.
Or lowly.
There was nothing lowly
or humble.
Or humble about it. There was nothing about it.
No,
any of those things.
And so it's just, the whole thing struck me as this incredible irony that the speaker was specifically talking about these themes we've just been addressing: lowliness, smallness, humility, the counterintuitive nature of the way God reveals himself to us. And yet the whole thing happening in this incredibly extravagant, extreme context of pomp and circumstance, very religious, extremely religious, formal, very formal, not informal, but very formal. And it made me think that the medium is contradicting the message. That the simplicity of what God came to do and the way God came to do it should say something about the way we understand God, about the way we view God, about the way that we think about Christianity in particular. I think the Christmas is an incredible opportunity to remind people of the counterintuitive ways in which God comes to us. He comes to us because we are bad, not because we are good. I said, I got the line in front of me. I said this on Friday night, that Christmas, and I wrote this line 3 years ago. And no, that's not true. That's not true. I didn't write it 3 years ago. I wrote it 7 years ago. In Christmas Eve, December 2014 is when I said this. It's not the last time I said it, but it's the first time I said it. That Christmas sets in motion, okay, the divine pattern of God drawing near to us, not because we do it right, but because we can't stop doing it wrong. And I think that those first few words are really important, that Christmas sets in motion the divine pattern. In other words, what we see happening at Christmas is not a one and done kind of thing. Christmas sets in motion this idea of God becoming small, God coming low, God coming to us because we are bad, not because we are good, God coming to us because we can't stop doing it wrong, not because we keep doing it right. That idea of the way God came to us at Christmas is the way God comes to us now, today, tomorrow, yesterday, and every day from now until the day we die or Jesus comes back. And so Christmas is not, it's funny because Christmas time, we celebrate the humility of God coming to us in the person of Jesus as a baby, the lowliness, the smallness, who God reveals himself to, like you mentioned, the shepherds, Mary. And yet, at the same time, we so quickly revert back. We bounce back reflexively to this idea that God comes to those and empowers those and blesses those and rewards those and all of that are good and strong and clean and mighty and whatever the case may be. And yet what we see is that God actually does the exact opposite.
Like if there's any notion that God left heaven to come here because like the party was here and like I want to go hang out with those people.
With the fun, good people?
Yeah, I mean, they're having a lot of fun in my creation, and I want to go be with them because, I mean, they're doing some pretty good things, and I want to be a part of it and, like, hang out with them. That's not it.
No.
And so,
no.
We definitely haven't nurtured a perspective that is accurate about why that's the humility of God. Like for him to become like us, frail humans, like to experience the things in this world that are terrible and awful and hurtful and painful. This world was then and is now sin sick. Like it is a sickness that has infected everything and everyone. And that's why he came, to be the cure for that, to be the rescuer from that sin sickness. And we don't always see it as he had to come because we were sick.
Yeah, and I would even take it a step further and say it's not just that God became like us. He became us.
Right.
I mean, he really... Our relationship to God is not dependent on our becoming like Jesus, okay?
Right.
Hear me say
Thank
this
God.
as clearly as I can say it. Our relationship to God is not dependent on our becoming like Jesus. Our relationship to God is entirely dependent on the fact that Jesus became us.
Right.
That's why. That's how God is even able to relate to us, is because we are clothed in the perfection and righteousness of his Son. And so I think it's super important at the same time to realize that, God doesn't love us as we are.
No.
The news is way better than that. God loves us as Jesus is. And that is the good news of not just Christmas in general, but the gospel in particular. And I think the very fact that we see, at the beginning of Jesus' life, we see him being born in a barn as a baby. He wasn't a pretend God man. He was 100% God, 100% man, okay? And then at the end of Jesus' life, we see him being executed like a common thief, spread eagle, naked on a cross. Both of those events should speak to how we understand God, and specifically how God relates to us. This idea that we have to do certain things or become a certain way or get better at this or learn to say no to those things more so in order for God to be able to be our friend or to be able to relate to us or to love us is just, it's a lie. It's a religious lie, and you can't find that in the Bible. You can find passages in the Bible that seem to indicate that something like that may be true, but when you look at those verses and when you look at those passages in their surrounding context, you realize it can't be saying that. And so I think Christmas is just... I told Stacie when I sat down on Christmas Eve, I keep it because we have a lot of readings and we have a lot of songs and we want to get people in and out in an hour for the most part. And I think we pretty much did. Maybe it was like an hour and 6 minutes, but we pretty much did. But so I keep whatever I'm going to say pretty short. I normally preach, 35, 40 minutes on a Sunday morning, but on Christmas Eve, it's like maybe 10, 15 minutes max. And I sat down and I looked at Stacie. I said, to be honest, I wanted to keep preaching. It's almost like God gripped me about 8 minutes into what I was saying. Like I felt like I was kind of trudging along the first 7 minutes. And then by about minute 8 or so, it was almost just like if you're a preacher, you know what I'm talking about. That happens sometimes. It happens. I told you when I sat down to remind you when we got home to tell you a story.
Oh yeah, and I forgot. I was
she
cooking
forgot
the fondue and the things and
right. It's not her fault that she forgot, but
I was also
but
very
I just
unconscious.
I just remembered it now. So remind me later to
Okay.
tell you. I can't tell you the whole thing right now because it would take too long.
Okay,
and,
okay.
But it's a story that I read many years ago, and it accurately depicts the way I felt on Friday night. It accurately depicts the way I felt Friday night, where you're kind of in it, and you're kind of feeling a little bit like you're by yourself, and then all of a sudden you realize you're being carried. And that's the way it felt. And so when I sat down, I looked at Stacie and I said, I wanted to keep preaching. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to keep preaching was because this theme cannot be expounded on enough I mean, and Christmas is such a perfect opportunity to expound on it because of what we're celebrating. I mean, I want people so badly to know that they don't have to get clean and get right and get good to be with God. That God has done all of those things for us in the person of Jesus so that we could be right with God forever. That God has done everything needful, everything necessary in order for you to be a family member of his, to be his adopted son or daughter, and that he loves his adopted sons and daughters, not because of what they do or how clean they can become or what they accomplish or how holy or religious they can be. He simply loves them because of what his son has done on their behalf. He's adopted them because of what his son has done on their behalf. And that's just so liberating. It's so freeing, and it sets me free to be able to talk about my messiness and my sin and my struggle, because I know that God doesn't relate to me based on my messiness and my sin and my struggle. God doesn't relate to me based on my failures. God relates to me based on Jesus' success for me. And Christmas speaks volumes to that, which is why we sing.
And I think it's like why we
no.
sing. Were you going to say sing something?
Well, yeah, we don't not just sing in general. It's not why we sing "Beat It" or right, yeah. But why we sing "Come ye sinners, poor and needy, weak and ruined by the fall. If we tarry till we're better, we will never come at all." I mean, it's an invitation to come. I've shared this story before on numerous occasions about the professor that I had in seminary, who was teaching us on the sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, in one class, and he told this story about a woman. So just to give you some context, in Scotland, the way a lot of the Presbyterian tradition in Scotland, the way they celebrate the Lord's Supper is that they set up a big table in front of the church, and people come up in large groups and sit around the table, and they pass the cup and they pass the bread and they take it that way, and then they go back and sit down, and the next group comes up, and this teacher of mine who was Scottish said that he remembered an occasion in which he was serving communion in a church in Scotland, and the next group that was coming up to sit around the table, one of the people in the group was this woman who, as she made her way to the front, had her head hung low. She was very sheepish. She looked like she was filled with guilt and shame. And she sat down at the table, and when the cup came to her, she looked at it with her head bowed low, didn't drink it, and passed it on. And this professor of mine noticed that, and he grabbed the cup from the person she had passed it to and gave it back to her and said, "Woman, drink, it's for sinners." And I just think that illustration has always stuck with me because it's such a sweet and powerful reminder that God is for sinners, that God comes for sinners, that God came into the mess and the muck of our sin and our guilt and our debauchery and our rebelliousness and our selfishness and our self-righteousness, all of it. He comes into that. He gets his hands dirty by becoming human to save us and to rescue us because he loves us.
And our sin is the only thing that we have contributed to our salvation. When we think that we've offered our goodness or to God, we're offering, if there is any goodness that we actually have to offer, it's God's goodness to God. It's not even our own goodness to claim.
No.
So what we offer is our sin.
Yeah.
And that's what we contribute to our salvation, the sin that makes it necessary. Yeah. And I was thinking about what you said as you were talking about keeping Christmas in our hearts and mind afresh all year long, reminds us that reflecting that love that has come to us in such humility is then shown by loving our neighbor. It's not that we won't do good things for each other, for people who are in our lives, who are considered our neighbor. You're my neighbor. You know, our kids, our family, our church family, or friends, whoever I see in the grocery store or whoever I come in contact with is my neighbor. And by God reminding me of Christmas and Easter, the cross hidden in Christmas, because you can't have this good news without the cross. That's reflective of, when I do good to my neighbor, it's reflective of something I understand, not something I need to do in order to gain something. It's something
Yes.
I'm reflecting to give out because I realize what I've gotten.
The
in
catchy
Jesus.
way to put that is our good works do not direct God's favor. Our good works reflect God's favor. In other words, if we are loved to the degree that we've been talking about this morning,
if we understand that,
yes,
to some degree.
Our instinct, our sort of reflex is going to be to love someone else. I mean, I can't love anybody the way they need to be loved without God first loving me. I mean, God's love for me, as we see at Christmas in particular, like we're talking about this morning, I mean, that compels love from me. It's impossible to, I think it's impossible to sort of really think on the way God has loved us and the fact that God has loved us to the degree that he has loved us, without at the same time being moved to want to love other people. Now, we do that imperfectly, we do that fallibly, and even the love that we share or the love that we give to others is always has mixed motives in it.
It's always tainted.
It's always tainted by sin. It's never perfect. It's never sinless. But the fact of the matter is, it does compel me. It does make me want to be. I mean, the person who I've experienced in my life, the person who tends to be the most gracious is the person who understands how much grace they've been given because they need it. The person who tends to be the most forgiving is the person who understands just how profoundly they themselves have been forgiven. The person who tends to be most loving is the person who understands how deeply they are loved, not because they deserve it, but because they don't deserve it. That just it shapes you. So any idea that talking about God's acceptance of us and God's love for us because we are weak and sinful and needy will then make us lazy and hoard that love. It doesn't even make sense. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works in real life. When we are deeply gripped and moved by God's love for us, it makes us want to love other people, even though we do it sinfully and imperfectly. But what else? I mean, I honestly don't think we could talk about that enough.
No,
I just
I don't
don't,
either.
because everything we believe here at the sanctuary and everything we believe about God and the gospel and the human condition and our sin and God's grace and God's law and God's gospel, the way God relates to human beings, all of that stuff is just embodied in the message of Christmas. The fact that God came speaks to the severity of our situation. How God came speaks to the way God relates to us. I just think it's such a beautiful, beautiful picture. And so my hope and my prayer is that Christmas, as we think about these things, will not just be a one and done. It's not a one and done thing for God, and I don't want it to be a one and done thing for us either. That, as Ebenezer Scrooge says at the end of A Christmas Carol, I will keep Christmas in my heart all year long. I think that there's a lot of truth and necessity to that, to realize that we live our lives in light of this truth, not just on Christmas, but every day.
And I think that's just going back to, we always are saying here, you from the stage and just in general in conversations about theology and Christianity, is that God works with this cycle of death and resurrection. And it's the life of Christ, his death for us, and his resurrection. And for us to ever separate Christmas from Easter and the hope that we have that we're looking back at his birth and looking back at his death and resurrection, and we look forward to the second coming because of these things, because he's kept his promises to his people, and keeping those in the forefront of our mind and like filtering how we live daily life, and then what that means in terms of how I filter my life circumstances, how I filter who I am, what I struggle with, what the people around me struggle with, which makes me have other conflict in my life that I'm not fully equipped to deal with, but that these promises that God has fulfilled help me have some sort of reconciliation with the fact that I don't have to have all the answers. I can be gracious to myself in that I'm not going to handle them well all the time, if ever, and that other people are not, and that this is not heaven. And so Christmas is not going to be heavenly and perfect every year it comes around. It looks different every year. It has every year in my 48 Christmases now. And that's something that I think people in general, like Christmas is so commercialized, and I'm not opposed to all the fun festivities and ways to celebrate it, because I think Christmas is worth celebrating in a very particular way. But, we have these visions of grandeur for Christmas a lot of the times. People do, families do, churches do. We saw that Christmas Eve, and that's ultimately not what is true. We're not going to experience heavenly Christmases this side of heaven, because that's literally why Jesus had to come. Because this place is a wilderness, and it's hard, and it's painful, and it's full of death in some way, and sickness, sin sickness. And so I think the reason some of that gets heightened at Christmas, and maybe somebody shows up at a church, is because those things in us, those human things in us that we can't escape, no matter where we fall economically or socially, they're there all year long. And to be reminded of the truth of Christmas can meet those places of need and want in a way that there's nothing else that can. That somebody has already come to you and gifted you all that you actually need. I've come to help you. I've come to rescue you and give you this gift that is the ultimate gift that you would never ask for. This is not what you're going to ask for, but it's what you're asking for in a way that you have no idea you even need to. And I think that that's like one of the most beautiful things about Christmas, is when everything that we have the plans for don't go as planned. We have this person that has come to rescue us, and remembering him at Christmas in that way is just very powerful.
And I think it reveals, I said this on Friday night, but I mean, Christmas really does reveal a God who knows your deepest struggles, who knows your darkest secrets. I mean, he came, John 1 tells us, he came into the dark to shine his light.
Right.
I mean, he describes the human condition as dark. It's dark. And when you think of darkness, you typically think of things that happen outside of your control, bad things that happen.
Or other bad people.
Right. Bad things that happen either that you do or that other people do. Darkness is kind of it's a real metaphor for badness in many ways. The lack of sight, the lack of light. And the fact that Christmas reveals this God who knows your deepest struggles, who knows your darkest secrets, and none of it, and I mean none of it, causes him to blink or bail at all. He came because of those things. He didn't come despite those things. And I just think that that's a hugely important thing. We talk about that. We may shout amen to that. But before this day is over, okay, we will all, in some way, shape, or form, subtly or not so subtly, revert back to this idea that God will bless me, God will reward me, and we may not think in terms of this consciously, but this is so natural to the way we think. It's our default mode, the way that we think, that before this day is over, we will fall back into the idea that God's disposition toward me, the way God feels about me, what God has promised to do for me is in some way, shape, or form dependence on my performance, how I behave. And maybe it's not if I behave well, then God will bless me. Maybe it's I'm just going to be brutally honest about how misbehaved I have been, and that God will bless. Either way, okay? Either you're saying, God will bless me if I perform well, or God will bless me because I've acknowledged that I haven't performed well. Both of those things are assuming that God will bless you, take care of you based on something you do or don't do. And the fact of the matter is that that's thankfully not true. And Christmas shouts that that's not true to us.
It says, you have a need. You're not asking for the solution. I'm going to give it to you.
Right.
Because I love you.
And I'm going to give it to you in a way that you would never expect. I mean, when you fast forward to, oh my gosh, hold on a second. I think it's Luke 24. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go on a limb and say Luke 24. If you fast forward to Luke 24, now, Christmas has happened. Jesus' birth has happened. His life has happened. His death has happened. His resurrection has happened, okay? And we get to Luke 24, and beginning in verse 10, excuse me for 1 second. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but beginning in verse, that's 13, not 10. It looked like a 10 without my glasses, but in actuality, it's verse 13. So beginning, Luke 24, beginning in verse 13, Luke tells the story about the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Okay, and these were religious guys. These were people who believed in God. These were people even who at the time believed that Jesus was God. Okay? And this was after Jesus' resurrection, but before he had appeared to these guys. And so all they knew was that this guy they had banked all their hopes on was murdered. He was killed. He was executed. Therefore, he must not have been the one that we thought he was. So they're walking along the road, dejected, down. Their hopes had been dashed. They were banking on the fact that this was going to be the guy who was going to come and restore Israel to their social and political prominence. And now he's been killed. And so they're, it's kind of like shattered dreams for these guys. And Jesus approaches them on their walk, and they are prevented from recognizing him. And he looks at them and says, "Hey, strangers, how's it going?" And they're just kind of mopey and down. And he said, "What's going on?" He said, where have you been, man? Have you not heard that, this guy that we were banking all of our hopes on, that an entire company of people were banking their hopes on, was killed? And Jesus says, you guys have completely misunderstood the entire point of the fulfillment of the promise that God made, that this is exactly the way God was going to fulfill his promise. And it just shows that it's not just non-religious, secular people who have a misunderstanding of who God is and how God works. It's religious people, it's moral people, it's people who believe in God, who have a radical misunderstanding of the way God works and how God does things. And these two disciples prove that. So even though we may sit here and talk about this the way we have been, and you may be listening and thinking, yes, that's true, that's right, yes, that's good news, because it really is good news, we so quickly revert right back. If we go out and do something bad today, okay, or we blow it, we fail, we get in a fight with our spouse, or
we just need the trash taken out.
Right. Or
like about every 10, 11 seconds, we revert.
Yeah, whatever the case may be. We will say something, we will do something, we will fail to say something, we will fail to do something. We will become aware of the fact that we've just messed up, that we've just done something. And at some level, and I know this happens for me all the time, and I'll tell you how in a second. It's embarrassing to admit, given what I'm committed to saying and what I'm committed to believing. But we, at that moment, kind of think that maybe God looks at me a little bit different now because I just blew it. Okay, here's an embarrassing confession. It's not going to surprise anybody who's known me for more than 15 minutes, but so I started smoking cigarettes at probably 13 years old. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, just for the record, but I was always kind of like, I smoked and then I quit. I was like 20, 21 years old and I quit. And then I would, kind of from time to time smoke again. If I would get really stressed, I might go buy a pack of cigarettes, Marlboro Lights. I might go buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke like 2 or 3 and then throw them away, okay? Well, so going back years now, it is ridiculous. Okay, now this is after I'm committed to preaching this. I've seen this. I believe this. I feel like to a certain degree, I not only understand the gospel, but I am at this point in my life, go back a number of years, committed to preaching the gospel. And no matter how many times I might sneak away and have a cigarette during the week, okay, I would never have one on Saturdays, come hell or high water. I would never smoke a cigarette on Saturdays because in my brain, that was my sermon prep day, okay? And
You gotta be good.
Yes, to a certain degree. I really felt like I need to go in. I believe God is good no matter what, but I don't want to take any chances. So I'm going to hedge my bets here, and I'm going to bank a little bit on I'm serious, and we laugh. I'm giving you a silly illustration about myself. You and everybody else could give some other illustration of the same thing. It just may not be cigarette smoking on Saturday. But regardless, I mean, it was almost like, okay, in order to ensure that God is going to bless this sermon I preach on Sunday, I got to be extra clean on Saturday. And that includes, even if I smoked half a pack of cigarettes on Friday night, I'm not smoking any on Saturday. I mean, how stupid is that? Now, that's a ridiculous illustration, and that's not my problem anymore, thank God. But at the same time, I'm like, man, that just shows how quickly, how reflexively we bounce back to this sort of karmic view of the way God relates to us.
We not only do that internally, ourselves, we impose it on other people around us, which honestly is one reason why I believe the word Christian, or like a person, if the persona behind a Christian would be judgment instead of
the reputation,
forgiving, joyful, loving, patient, caring person, or person who understands God and their need for Him. It's more of, because we impose those wrong views about our relationship with God onto other people, because we try to do that horizontally, person to person, and because we have unbelief, I believe, help my unbelief. And in those moments, that's what we're doing. We're exhibiting the fact that we do have unbelief in our life. In ourselves, we wrestle with it every day in some way, whether we're conscious of it or not, and that we need a God who can meet that unbelief and forgive it.
So if you remember anything about what we said, we're going to shut it down here in a second, but if you take away one thing, and only one thing, from what you heard us talk about today, just remember, you can smoke cigarettes on Saturday, and God will not hold it against you Sunday when you're preaching, okay? I'm just kidding. Don't smoke cigarettes. It's just unhealthy, okay? God's disposition towards you is not going to change whether you do or don't, but
and if
just
it's
don't.
Just pure vanity, it's like really bad for your teeth and your skin and everything else.
Well, it's not healthy. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
It's not healthy. Anyway, that's ending on a high note. Don't smoke. If you heard anything we said this morning, just hear this. Don't smoke, children. We will be back in person in terms of in-person worship services next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. We will also, as we do each and every Sunday, be live streaming the service. So even though it's not this format on Sundays, you can tune in wherever you're watching from right now. You can tune in every Sunday, 10:30 a.m. from wherever you are, and join us here in Jupiter, Florida for about an hour and 15 minutes or so on Sunday mornings. Stacie does this thing on Sunday mornings called Virtual Lobby about 15 minutes before the service starts, where she walks around and kind of talks to people, but she does it on our social media platforms, YouTube and
No, I don't think it goes on
Oh, no,
YouTube.
no, just Facebook.
It's actually only on your page.
Oh, it's only on my Facebook page. Sorry. But it's a way for people who don't live here to get to know some of the people who do. And it's been kind of cool. It's been really cool. In fact, we've been able to make some connections between
Yeah.
people in our church and people who don't live here because of that. So again, let us know where you're watching from. Let us know in the comment section how we can be praying for you. We have a prayer team that loves to get prayer requests from people all over the world, and we commit to praying for those things. If this ministry has in any way, shape, or form blessed you, we need all the help we can get financially. I mean, your gifts help make this happen. It pays the bills and keeps the roof on, and keeps this ministry going forward. So there is a give link also from wherever you're watching. You can click that. You can give online from wherever you are. Anything and everything helps, literally. Some people might give, and we don't know who gives what. I don't want to know those things, and I don't care about that stuff. But I mean, you know, $5 gifts doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You don't have to be a big giver at all. But everything helps. Everything helps, and we need all the help we can get. So thank you. We may not know you personally, but we love you. And believe it or not, you were prayed for this morning because I prayed for everybody who would be tuning in, that God would speak to you in a very specific way and meet you where you are. So in that sense, you were prayed for.
And if somebody you know has had a hard Christmas, sometimes this is a great time to just share this our YouTube channel or Facebook pages.
Yeah.
It would be the easiest way to share this message with somebody that you know, or that you think would benefit from hearing something like this.
That's right.
Because it's the best news you could hear.
Best news you can hear. So thank you all. We hope that you have a good rest of the week.
It's Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. It's the last week of December.
It is, yeah.
When we see you guys next time, it'll be 2022.
Yeah, we will see you next year. Okay, thanks.